about the impact of austerity measures and spending cuts on growth? Well, there are two time periods that we have to look at. The long term is absolutely settled. You shrink the size of government. I mean, in the long term, it's good for growth. The question is, what happens in the short term? In the short term, the debate is far from settled. That being said, there are a few lessons that have emerged. The first one, when you try to think of what type of policy actually stimulate the economy, tax cuts are not stimulative. Tax increases are not stimulative, but tax cuts are more likely to be way more likely to be stimulative than spending increases. I mean, even left to center economists like Christina Romer and her husband David Romer. Christina Romer was the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under the Obama administration. Their research has shown that if your plan is to shrink the deficit, if you reduce taxes by 1% of GDP, you will get roughly 3% percentage growth, GDP growth. So this is a pretty now accepted finding. The second is that fiscal adjustment achieved through spending cuts rather than tax increases are less recessionary than the one achieved through tax increases. And finally, the third one is that spending-based fiscal adjustment accompanied by the right fiscal policy like sound money and the rule of law and these type of things tends to be less recessionary and even can produce good short-term results on growth. So with this in mind, we should look at what the Europeans have done, right? And think in terms of this big supposedly backlash against austerity. Here you have selected countries that were very much the talk during this debate as evidence that austerity had failed in Europe. And one of the things that we heard over and over again is that austerity was failing and these countries weren't growing because they were cutting spending. And what this chart shows, and it's based on European Commission data, right, is that actually they really haven't. I mean, when you look at France, they haven't. When you look at the UK, they certainly haven't. When you look at Italy, it's flattened, but it's certainly not a spending cut. Spain is cut slightly. And Greece, it's a little unfair to put Greece there because it kind of doesn't show as the scale of the cuts. They've cut way more than the others, but certainly nothing compared to the level of spending cuts that would be required. So when we talk about these savage spending cuts that took place in Europe, I mean, the data actually demonstrate that when some of countries have cut spending, but they were never savage. It was never gigantic, and many of them actually really haven't either cut spending. More importantly, one of the things that's actually totally absent from the debate is the fact that all of these countries have massively increased taxes. And I'm still waiting for Paul Krugman of all the people who think that we should increase spending or who have been denouncing austerity in Europe to actually write articles begging Europeans to stop raising taxes. Because even in a Keynesian context, I mean, in times of recession, they want to stimulate aggregate demand by increasing spending, but they also argue that you should be cutting taxes. So where are the headlines asking, from a Keynesian perspective, to stop the tax increases in Europe?